Hello, BookTube. I have a tag for you today. I know it's not Tag Tuesday, but a whole swamp of tags have been cropping up in my feed lately. A lot of them have been new. A lot of them I've wanted to jump right in on, but no one's tagged me because they hate me, because I smell. And then the more I investigated, the more I realized that some really good ones have tagged me, and I've just slipped through the cracks, just ignored them. So I want to catch up. This is not Tag Tuesday, but I'm going to do a tag every day this week, I think, to try and catch up. And you might think with all of that backlog, that this tag would be a step in that direction. But no, I am making an original tag for today to delay things even more. And the tag in question was inevitable, given the news. Yes, yeah. Your worst fears have come true, BookTube. I have made a coronavirus book tag. So let's get right in it, shall we? Number one is Misleading Initial Reporting. A book that turned out to be very different, not necessarily worse, than your first impressions or that you'd first heard. And I have an example in mind here that I want to show you. I glanced at it and thought the worst. And I know that the worst is coming, but this is not an example of that. This is a thoroughly, thoroughly wonderful kids' book. This is written by Kate Messner and drawn by Adam Rex, and it's called The Next President. There's the White House with a figure in the doorway. And when I first saw this, my first impression of it was that it was going to be one of those, these are our president's kids' books that carefully prizes out details in order to give something interesting and fun about each president. And the reason that is negative, the reason why that immediately set my teeth on edge, is because I know those books are coming and they're going to have to normalize Donald Trump. And there's no way to do it without explicitly lying. This is a man who's been bankrupt so many times. This is a man who has paid porn stars to cheat on wives, raped wives, beaten wives. This is a man who has never done right by any business partner, who's welched on every deal he's ever made and made them poorly, and a man who's completely disastrous as president, who has mocked disabled people, who has paid off porn stars in order to effect an election, who has suborned the independent governments of other countries with withheld military aid in order to get dirt on a political opponent, and whose rabid fan base has called all of that fake the whole time, when it's factual, it's recorded, it's visual, it's taped. He's admitted it. Books like this, you've seen them, we're going to see them. They have to talk about him, and they have to talk about him in kid-friendly, relatively neutral terms, and that shouldn't be possible. They even have to do it about President Nixon. I had the same tooth-on-edge reaction when these books were coming out then, because they don't make any exceptions. They don't leave anybody out. So I knew at the time that those books had to say something fun or cute about President Nixon, about President Johnson, later on about George H.W. Bush. And that was my first impression. That was my first thought, was that that's what this was going to do, but it doesn't. It doesn't. Let's see here. Well, this comes out at the very end of March from Chronicle Books. I don't know how much I can show you here. Look at this. You know how kids' books start with "This book belongs to," and then there's a line where the kids can sign their name? Look at that. Isn't that awesome? But what this book means to do is literally what the title says. It's to show you who the next president will be. Not predicting it, but rather showing you how unlikely or how likely it was based on all of the previous presidents before they were president. If that made any sense. So you have William Henry Harrison, 16-year-old and studying medicine. You have Martin Van Buren, 7 years old, helping out with his chores in his parents' farm. You have President number 12, 4-year-old Zachary Taylor, was living with his two brothers on the Kentucky farmland his father had been given for serving in the Revolutionary War. And there you have them, see? And the whole point, the conceit of the book, is that at the time, no one knew they were the next president. There are a couple of, see, you've got Millard Fillmore, Franklin Pierce, James Buchanan, there they all are. Just going about their lives, not knowing that they're going to be president one day. Some of the figures we see in old age. Not many of them. Most of them are disarmingly young. Ulysses S. Grant, Rutherford B. Hayes, look at them. Not at all how you picture them. It's long before they were president. Some of the figures here, like for instance, William Howard Taft is shown fully adult. He is shown fully adult and on the Supreme Court. But what we're told about him is that He was serving as a judge and teaching at the University of Cincinnati Law School. He was a big man who had a reputation as a fighter and a wrestler when he was growing up, but we don't see him as a younger man. we don't see President McKinley as a younger man either, mainly because he's almost inconceivable as a younger man. And I was reading this and I was utterly charmed throughout. Now, the artwork's fantastic, but I was utterly charmed by that as an approach. And I was thinking, well, okay, what's going to happen then when you get to Donald Trump? Like you've got Richard Nixon on TV. He doesn't look happy, but he's not vilified, and it doesn't last page after page after page. But I was wondering what would happen when we got to Donald Trump, and it's done really, really, really well. President 45, Donald Trump was a teenager then. He was attending New York Military Academy, where his father had hoped he'd learn some discipline. And there he is with a plane in his hand, and that's it. That's all. and all that's left is for the book to say that at least 10 of our future presidents are probably alive today. If we go by the odds, 3 of them are likely serving in government somewhere already. 1 is in college or in the military. 3 probably have other jobs, practicing law, building things, teaching, running a business. And at least 3 of our future presidents are kids. What are they doing right now? Look at that. That is just fantastic. Little did I imagine, I didn't think it was possible, that I would get to the end of a book like this and be just clapping with happiness. But I was. So that's a perfect recent example of my first question. I thought I knew exactly what I was getting with that book, and instead I got something flat out wonderful. So it also functions as a recommendation if you've got kids, or even not. The artwork in here is so beautiful you don't need kids. Just tell the cashier that you have one. But this is a fantastic book. It will teach you things. No matter how versed you are in presidential biography, it will teach you things. So it functions as a recommendation as well. Let's see here. Question number 2. Harsh containment measures. I want you to tell me a book or type of book that it's impossible to hand to readers of other types of books. So, in other words, something that is siloed is the current 21st century word, where it's fantastic, but you can't hand it to somebody else and expect them to like it or even to get it. And there are a whole bunch. And you get extra points with this question if you've actually tried. And since I spent a quarter of a century as a bookseller, I have tried. So I get my own extra points. And I have 2 books that I want to mention that are perfect examples of this, but you'll have plenty on your own. One is a science fiction novel named Startide Rising by David Brin, who's a professional scientist. And Startide Rising is fantastic. It won the Hugo Award, won the Nebula Award. It's a great novel, a great science fiction novel. But unlike a lot of other great science fiction novels, you can't hand it to a non-science fiction fan. You just can't do it. You just can't do it. You have to be familiar with the genre in order to like it, I think. Certainly, I've never had an occasion where that wasn't true. And another example that I had was even more frustrating than that, because I loved it so much that my natural impulse was to hand it to people at the bookstore. And that's Max Brooks's book, World War Z, which is absolutely terrific as a novel. It does nothing wrong as a novel, but it is a zombie apocalypse novel. And I would have regular customers of mine, big blue-haired Back Bay matrons, including a lot of old friends of mine who follow me from bookstore to bookstore when I worked in bookstores and were willing to spend any amount of money. These women are as wealthy as God, and I never led them wrong, and they were proud of saying that, sometimes a little too loudly. and they would come in and they'd say, "What's new, Cookie? How's things? What book should I absolutely have?" And at the time, for probably 2 or 3 months, I wanted to say to them, World War Z. And a couple of times I did. And they'd say, "Oh, what's it about?" And I'd say, "It's about zombies." And they'd say, "Oh, no, honey, no." Nevertheless, it's terrific, but you know what I mean. It's that kind of a book. You really can't hand it to just anybody. Then question number 3 is the flip side. Intense communicability. A book that will work its magic on just about anybody. And I have a famous example of this that I had at bookstores, which is Michael Shar's book, The Killer Angels, a novel about the Battle of Gettysburg, that you would think would at least turn off people who don't read historical fiction. And I would tell those people, I know you don't read historical fiction. I realize that. And this is historical fiction. This is about the Battle of Gettysburg, and you will love it. You will absolutely love it. There is no chance that you won't. I used to tell customers, if you don't like this book, I'll buy it back from you. And I never had anyone take me up on that. I, in fact, had many, many customers come to my information desk a little abashed, sometimes even angry, and say, well, I can't say that I don't like historical fiction anymore because that was great. You were right. So that's my example there, but I'd love to know yours. Then question number 4, serious mortality rate. A book with a significantly noticeable body count. So not just 1 or 2 people dying, but lots of people dying. And the example that always comes to mind, I used to have a great laugh about this with students when I taught this work, is Hamlet. Of course, where at the end, effectively, everybody dies. The standard joke among bad writing and in bad writing workshops is that at the end, everybody dies. But nevertheless, at the end of Hamlet, the bodies are dropping like flies. And I don't know how much it works. I know it's absolutely sacrosanct to say that there's anything in Hamlet that doesn't work, but I think that Hamlet as a play is mostly composed of things that don't work. I think that's a large part of the miracle of what it is. But I'm not 100% sure that the bloodbath at the end of the play really works. It's kind of hard to keep track who's killing who and how and why. But nevertheless, that was the answer that came first to mind. Then question number 5 is quarantine prep. Because no matter where you are, no matter where you live in the world, there's a good chance that by this time next month, you will be under some kind of quarantine. The numbers seem to be moving in that direction, and they don't seem to be slowing down or moving in any other direction. So, on a serious note, I strongly advise you to make some preparations for that. And not the joke going around BookTube is, of course, you need to prepare by loading up with books. But you need canned food is what you need. And stockpile of medication if you need insulin or whatever. And stockpile your pet's food as well. And you might want to keep in mind a supply of water, bottled water. You don't know how bad it will get. Think of people in 5, 6, 7, 8 other countries now who didn't think this was going to happen. And you don't want to be scrambling. So, toilet paper, your medicines if you need any medicines, dog food, cat food, and canned food for yourself. But in terms of, this is meant to be a fun tag. In terms of this tag, quarantine prep is 5 books or series that you'd want with you under house confinement. And my goal kind of here is for you to list them fairly quickly. Don't overthink it. I want your heart to be speaking here. And my list is the King James Bible, which is not false for me. I know a lot of people would say that and then never touch it, but I actually can't live without it. Find it absolutely inexhaustible. Also, Lord of the Rings. Just a big fat 1-volume Lord of the Rings. I've gone back to that book so many times that I know now that I won't tire of it. Also, I think that the actual technical title of this series is The Emberverse by the science fiction author S.M. Stirling. The first book in the series is Dies the Fire, and then the series goes on for like 20-something books. And the organizing premise at the beginning is that suddenly a flash scrambles the neurons of everybody in the world for just a second. It feels like an intense migraine for just a second. And when that's over, no technology works. No higher technology works. Planes fall out of the sky, guns don't work, gunpowder doesn't work, electronics don't work, nothing like that. Internal combustion doesn't work. The world is reduced suddenly to completely pre-modern era, and a cast of characters, good and bad, have to figure out a way to live. And the books have a weird hypnotic quality. They are crammed full of thought. S.M. Stirling just thinks the daylights out of this stuff in every book, whether you believe it or not, whether or not some of the developments that he writes about some of them will make you say, oh, come on. And there are some gaps. Of course, these books, the whole series started before the internet. So the internet going out is not an active consideration in the book. So it's already alternate science fiction, alternate future stuff anyway. And also, naturally being me, I kept wondering in every book, in every successive book, and I love them. Don't get me wrong. I love these books. That's why I want them under quarantine. If I had the whole thing, I don't have the whole series. I wish I did. But naturally, in the course of the books, I kept wondering, where are all the dogs? Where are all the dogs? There are no dogs. They should be everywhere. They should be ruling things in a lot of places. But they would organize into informal packs much faster than humans would. They have much better ability to revert to a wild state than humans do. And they're not going to back down from humans if humans don't have the ability to shoot them. But one way or another, the Emberverse would be there. One of my bookish goals for the remainder of my life would be to get the whole of the series just in a uniform set, or paperbacks or hardcovers or whatever. Then also The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire by Edward Gibbon, to bring my number up to 4, because the Gibbon is also inexhaustible. And number 5 for me would be The Tale of Genji, a big, gigantic, 1,000-year-old novel that I have never got to the bottom of. I find it so beautiful and so fascinating that I definitely want it along. Then prompt number 6 is repeat infection. Some indications from international health organizations that if you are infected a second time, it's worse. There are lots of viral infections where that turns out to be true, and it looks like this might be one of them, where you have it once, you have a rough time, you get through, and if you catch it again, you die. No idea if that's true, no idea the details of that. This is still a thing being studied. But Repeat Infections Prompt is a book that was even more effective on you the second time around. And for me, that's lots of books. As you know, if you watch this channel, I read the advanced reading copy first. And if I get Unbound Galley pages before I get the advanced reading copy, then I'll read that first, then the advanced copy, then the finished copy. But usually it's an advanced copy, a review copy, and then the finished copy. So I'm revisiting books all the time. And I vigorously reread older stuff as well. But a recent example that comes to mind, stuff that I really liked, volumes that I really liked the first time, and then the second time around found them genuinely impressive. Like the kind of, this is serious, put away the chatter, this is a 100-year achievement, impressive. And I guess we should hope that Martine has left the room, because it's Charles Moore's books on Margaret Thatcher. This is a biography wrought to a very, very high level. I almost know of no equal in relatively modern times. And that didn't strike me. I mean, I read all 3 of the volumes. The first time I read each of the volumes, I thought, okay, that's really, really good. This is dryly intelligent, dryly humorous. It's not hagiography at all. It's fair. It's strong. But it is relatively positive. The biographer never loses the conviction that he should be telling the life, which sometimes biographers do. They just come to hate their subject. That was the first impression that I had with all 3 of those volumes. And then each time when I read it a second time, that estimation went way up. It's an amazing performance. And that's the kind of thing I'm talking about in this question. Something that you had an opinion about one way or another and liked a lot more the second time around. I'd love to hear it. And then question number 7 is a little more general. It's effective prevention. What are some of the ways to prevent bookish infection? When you've read a couple of lousy books in a row, or you've got a bad taste in your mouth, or you're in one of these reading slumps that I hear so much about. What do you do? What's your home cure to get rid of that kind of bookish infection? And for me, it's palate cleansers. I try to do that even when I don't feel like I'm building an infection, just to make sure that I don't. Because that's a horrible feeling when you're feeling like no new book can do right by you. That feels very lonely. You built your whole life around them, and all of a sudden they're letting you down. So for me, it's palate cleansers. I will intersperse a serious or weighty book with a quick read of something that I know will please me. Like, for instance, these things, old-style Regency romance novels. I absolutely love them. They make perfect palate cleansers, just perfect. But also, just recently, thanks to one of you, Conan short stories are also terrific as palate cleansers because they take you away from everything. I wish they didn't take me away from quite so much of everything. I wish that I got more high fantasy in the mail, more new release high fantasy. I don't quite get as much of it as I was like. And I don't know that Conan would be a palate cleanser to that. But these old-style Regency romances, the ones where hanky-panky and marriage wait until after the last page, they're not made anymore. So they are perfect. I am not going to read anything like them. But I'd love to hear what yours are. What's your effective prevention? How do you cure yourself when you're infected with a bookish bug? And that's it. That is the coronavirus book tag. All that's left for me to do is tag people. Before I do that, I want to caution you, those of you who monetize your channels, I will not take offense if you don't do this tag, because it looks like YouTube is automatically demonetizing any video that mentions the word coronavirus. Whether the YouTube video in question is passing along disinformation or serious information, legitimate, fact-based information, doesn't look like YouTube cares. blanket demonetizing. So if you monetize your channel, you might not want to do this, and if so, I will understand. But I'm going to tag willy-nilly anyway. And I'm going to start with my my cohorts in Marsathon, because we're closing in on Marsathon. Me and a group of other booktubers are reading all of the Martian novels of Edgar Rice Burroughs, starting with The Princess of Mars in March. And those are Scott at Book Invasion, Mike at Pints and Paperbacks, Matt at Paperback Junkie, and of course Mark Richardson at Richardson Reads. I tag all of you in the coronavirus tag if you want to do it. But that leaves us plenty more. Like, for instance, Peg at the History Shelf. Are you allowed to do this tag? Will Martine let you, even though I've unexpectedly mentioned the horrible T word? I hope so. If so, I'd love to see it. Also, Roz at Scallydandling About the Books. Everybody loves to tag Roz because everybody wants her to make a video a day or more. So do I. Her videos are great. Well, I think we have to get as many of them as she has time to make, but still, consider yourself tagged. I think I've tagged you a couple of times now. Also, Kelly at Books I'm Not Reading. I don't know if you monetize your channel, but I would love to see this if you haven't. And that is the ripped from the headlines coronavirus. Oh wait, of course. Also Britta. I of course also tag Britta. What would a tag be without that? If she's quarantined, she'll have nothing to do but make book tags. So that is the coronavirus book tag, and you are now infected. Thank you, BookTube.